Monday, April 17th, 2000. Businesses are bracing for day 2 of protests in the nation's capital this morning as thousands are expected to try to stop the World Finance meetings. And will it be a Black Monday on Wall Street with the sell-off continuing, or will the bulls make a comeback?
First Business, America's news and information leader. Now, here's Trish McShane.
Good morning from Washington. Bart Eckert is on assignment. On Asian markets overnight, stocks plummeted, reacting to the worst week in Wall Street history. In Japan, the Nikkei plunged, closing down 6.98%, its 5th biggest percentage fall ever, pulled down largely by South Korean technology companies. The Nikkei closed at 19,008.64, losing more than 1,400 points. That's the Nikkei's lowest close since January 25th. The dollar weakened after top finance officials of the G7 made no mention of major currencies in its statement from the IMF summit. Hong Kong stocks also tumbled sharply as well. The Hang Seng's major technology ties responsible for the carnage there. Shares of China Telecom Hong Kong suffered more than a 12% loss. And it was the domino effect on other Asian markets as well. So the burning question on Wall Street this morning is, what next? After Friday's drubbing on news, inflation raced to its highest level in more than 5 years. Cash tumbled out of high-tech stocks. All 3 indexes logged their largest one-day point declines in history, although there was a bit of buying and an uptick in the last minutes of regular trading. The long bond at 5.78%, the New York Stock Exchange Composite Index off 33 points. A volume, a heavy 1.2 billion shares on the NYSE. On the move, financial issues were hammered. Examples, American Express and JP Morgan, driving the Dow down. Sun Microsystems up early based on great earnings last quarter, lost ground in the sell-off to end down 1 1/4. And how about a stock that moved up on the day? Harrah's Entertainment did just that, up 8% after the casino company said it's buying back 10% of its stock. However, Harrah's says earnings last quarter will fall short because fewer players were at the gaming tables. The blue chips lost a record 805 points, or 7.3% for the week. The Nasdaq fared even worse, shedding a record 1,125 points, or 25.3%. With more on the panicked selling that typified last week's market bloodbath and the test that lies ahead, here's correspondent Leslie Dotson of Reuters Financial Television in New York.
The market nosedived into the weekend with the Dow plunging 616 points in its biggest one-day drop in history, and investors abandoned the Nasdaq, sending the tech-heavy index down nearly 10%. The market rout was sparked by news of a steep increase in inflation. The Consumer Price Index for March shot up 0.7%, much higher than expected, sparking fears the Fed will aggressively hike interest rates to slow consumer spending. Much of that spending had been supported by the wealth effect brought on by rising stock prices, but it took 1 week of sharp losses to put fear back in the hearts of investors, many of whom spent the day checking their stocks and shaking their heads. This week's drop on the Nasdaq brings the index back to last December's levels. The bloodletting extended to many of the so-called safety stocks, big tech shares which analysts thought could weather periods of heavy volatility. And it came despite an early batch of strong tech earnings. Many of the tech leaders were in full retreat by the end of the week. Oracle, Dell, and Cisco Systems all shed as much as 15% on the session. Microsoft has now lost $230 billion in market cap since its 52-week high. Market analyst Ash Reagan at Prudential.
What they are now doing is coming to the leaders, generals in the Nasdaq, and throwing them out as well with the so-called bad names.
Looking at the final numbers, the Dow lost more than 5.5%, and the S&P 500 lost 84, and the Nasdaq suffered its largest point drop on record, ending down 357 points. That's the Reuters Market Report from the New York Stock Exchange. I'm Leslie Dodson.
The nation's capital is bracing for a second day of demonstrations and protests against the economic policies of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank this morning. The opening session of Day 2 IMF Summit went ahead as scheduled despite protests around the city. The fund released a 9-page communique at day's end, which reiterated the agency's current work on debt relief for the world's poorest countries and pledged internal reform to prevent another global currency crisis like the one in 1997 and 1998. The statement did not introduce any new ideas. Meanwhile, an estimated 10,000 protesters filled the streets, drawing attention to the human, labor, and environmental rights problems they contend arise from the policies of the IMF and the World Bank. Although most of the demonstrations were peaceful, at one point police in riot gear and on motorcycles charged into a crowd that was coming at the police line. They used pepper spray and smoke bombs to drive back the protesters. An area as large as 90 square blocks has been blocked off in downtown Washington in the vicinity of the IMF and the World Bank buildings. Well, storm clouds are hanging over most of the nation. Checking your national forecast this morning, here's All News Channel's Rob Pendleton.
The central United States will get some relief from wet weather as a high-pressure system moves in. This will move precipitation over to the East Coast with rain through the mid-Atlantic and thunderstorms in the Carolinas. Parts of California and Nevada can expect rain as well. For the highs, 60s and 70s for much of the country today, but cooler in the Northeast and Midwest, 40s and 50s, 80s in the South, and up into the 90s in Southwest Texas. Rob Pendleton, First Business.
Coming up on First Business, time is running out to pay your debt to Uncle Sam. Some last-minute tips for procrastinators coming up.
Ow! I feel good, like I knew that I would now.
Senecot laxative tablets work like second nature, comfortably overnight.
So good.
Senecot, the natural vegetable laxative. You'll feel so good. Senecot good.
The IRS is now reconciling back-owed taxes, levies, liens, payroll taxes, as well as penalties at a fraction of what's owed. Qualified tax professionals will negotiate and resolve your tax nightmares.
2/3 of your estate gone. Without proper planning, 2/3 of everything you've worked so hard to acquire could go to the government. Call Solomon Smith Barney at 1-800-EARNS-IT, extension 356, and see how a simple will isn't enough. Get your free special report, 10 Strategies for Preserving Your Wealth. You'll learn how to shelter up to $1 million by 2006. Why it may pay to retitle your assets. And whether you should own life insurance in your own name. See how to protect the people you care about most. Call 1-800-EARNS-IT, extension 356 for your special report today. See how we earn it. Solomon Smith Barney.
Among the top stories on our news headlines this morning, the latest on the custody battle over 6-year-old Elian Gonzalez and the dramatic story of an adventure that nearly turned to tragedy. With details, here's All News Channel's Liz Brumman. Good morning, Liz.
Good morning, Trish. Good morning, everyone. Elian Gonzalez's father lashes out at the boy's Miami relatives on national television. During an interview on CBS's 60 Minutes, Juan Miguel Gonzalez accused his Miami relatives of mistreating Elian and turning his son against him. The relatives apparently did not watch the interview. In Miami, protesters dismissed those comments as either selfish or manipulations of Fidel Castro, and demonstrators are hopeful that no legal action will take place during Easter week. Rallies for Elian are even taking place in New York. Cuban Americans shouted support for the boy outside Castro's mission in Manhattan. They too are waiting for word from a federal court that could decide at any time on aliens' future in the U.S. A Maryland man is in stable condition after crawling for 3 days through Grand Teton National Park. Vito Sescunas broke his ankle Tuesday while skiing by himself in Death Canyon. Sescunas spent the night in his tent and took off Wednesday morning for the nearest town, covering 5 miles by sliding. On Saturday, 2 other skiers discovered him and alerted park rangers. And that's a look at national headlines. I'm Liz Brumman for First Business.
Thanks, Liz. On the economic calendar this week, slim pickings. Tomorrow, the housing starts data for March will be out. A Reuters survey expects a bit of a drop from February's figures. And on Wednesday, the trade numbers for February will come our way, looking for a deficit of $23 2/3 billion. That's about $5 billion lower than in January. And to wrap up the week, financial markets will be closed for Good Friday. Mexican stocks saw their worst day of the year on Friday, with stocks plummeting almost 8%. The Bolsa IPC lost over 544 points, while the peso weakened to 9.48. Markets in the United Kingdom opened this morning prepared for the worst after Friday's rout on Wall Street. The FTSE ended the week with a loss of 178 points to close at 61.78. The yen down, the pound up, the Swiss franc lower, the euro gaining. Brent North Sea crude closed at $22.41 the barrel, that off 38 cents in New York trading. Tonight is the deadline for filing your taxes, and in this morning's business briefs, First Business correspondent Bob Urich has some last-minute tax tips as those final hours tick away.
Midnight Monday is your dreaded tax deadline. April 15th was actually Saturday, but whenever the day falls on a weekend, the filing deadline is pushed back to the following Monday night. If you're unable to file your return, you can apply for a 4-month extension. You avoid a late penalty, but still have to pay an estimated tax owed. But what if you finished your return but can't pay the tax due? File your return anyway and pay as much as you can. The IRS will send you a bill for the amount due. For more information, check the IRS website at irs.gov. Watch out, spam can find you when you're away from your computer. Consumer watchdog groups report more people are getting junk email on their wireless phones and pagers. Spam shows up on text message screens. Some cell phones that can't surf the net automatically leave behind their phone number on websites that are visited. Experts say consumers need to pressure wireless services to stop that practice and take other steps to stop unwanted email. Racing fans, rev up your taste buds. NASCAR race driver Jeff Gordon gets his own ice cream. Race fans suggested more than 8,000 ice cream creations. Flavors like Pit Stop Split with banana fudge and walnut and minty cool fuel. But Jeff's favorite, Jeff's Mint Chocolate Speedway, a mint ice cream with fudge swirls and number 24 mint chocolate cars.
It's just when you put it in your mouth, you go, I could have a lot of that.
Jeff's Mint Chocolate Speedway from Dreyer's and Edie's Grand will be in your grocer's freezer this summer. Bob Urich, First Business.
Still ahead on First Business this Monday morning. Instead of shopping at the mall for the latest CD, now you can download your favorite tunes from the internet for free. We'll show you how.